If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Skeptics, what eerie, unsettling thing, a demon, ghost, etc., have you seen? That made you believe in the paranormal? I grew up in extremely rural Mississippi. Everywhere used to be plantation land. Everyone lives where slaves used to work and exist. One night I woke up, and in the corner of my bedroom were two young, 6 to 7 year old, black kids wearing hand and foot chains. They were whimpering because they were obviously in some sort of trouble. I was frozen in terror at the sight, sounds, etc. I watched them, and they watched me in my bed. I have no idea how long we watched each other, but eventually they faded away and my parents got up for the day. Their looks, demeanor, fear, etc. are burned into my conscience forever. My dad was always trying to be funny. One night, my sister and I were in our bunk beds, and all lights were out except our porch light, which somewhat illuminated the room. We saw what we thought was our dad making funny faces through a crack in one of the doors to get into the room. We were laughing until the face got distorted and looked evil. We began to cry and scream, and our real dad came running in from the other door. We still talk about it to this day. My grandmother will always tell me about scary experiences that happened to her from her childhood until she was an adult, mostly ghosts and old legends that she saw with her own eyes. That's why I will always check my surroundings and be scared of the dark. I'm from the smallest country in Central America, so back then they didn't post lights in the streets or anything that would light up the path for people to walk. We had to use flashlights. My mom and I had to wake up at 4 a.m. to get the bus at 5 a.m. from the house I lived to the bus stop. You had to walk for probably 7 minutes, but you had to cross this cornfield and then this house that had a big open area where people played soccer. After that, you went through these 2 wooden doors that led you to another field, but it was filled with grass. The night before it rained, so that day it was muddy. When we were walking through that field filled with grass, we heard a voice calling out my mom's name. We turned around because we thought it was one of my mom's friends, but no one appeared. I started getting chills, so I told my mom to pick up the pace. Once we got out of that field, we waited for the bus. We kept looking back to the field we just came from, but no one came out, nor did we see any flashlights. I had many other experiences that involved ghosts or the paranormal. I'm a skeptic. I had an ex years ago who was really into ghosts and haunted stuff. We'd go and explore haunted and abandoned places all the time. I've had 2 experiences that gave me the chills. 1, we went to this abandoned farmhouse to check out the property late in the evening as it was just getting dark. This had a large shed or garage area attached to it, and just after we made it in, we got an uneasy feeling and started hearing what sounded like a pack of wolves running towards us in the distance, barking and growling from the other side of the field. We beelined it back to my truck as the sound of them kept getting closer, and she got inside. I opened my door and jumped on my running board, and the noise just stopped. I stood there and saw nothing, no wolves or anything. Like WTF? We left. Several years later, this property was on the news as someone else exploring it found a complete torture chamber in the basement. Weird as duck. Was torn down shortly after that discovery. On the east coast of Canada, Cape Breton is known to be very haunted. We decided to go to a very old cemetery at 2 a.m. It was a nice night with a full moon, so it was nice and bright out. We wandered around for about an hour looking at gravestones from the late 1800s. We then stumped across a gravestone all on its own, about 20 to 30 feet into the bush or wooded area and completely overgrown. We started pulling back some of the vines so we could read the names and dates on them. As soon as we read it out loud, we just got this ice cold chill down our spines, and your hair started standing on end. It honestly felt like we really pissed someone off, and they didn't want us there anymore. It was weird, and I can't really explain it. It felt like someone was there as we walked around for a few more minutes to get the hell out of Dodge. As we are pulling out through the gates, it looks like a shadow or dark figure in the mirrors behind us is making sure we leave. Creeped us the duck out. Lol. I do, only because of an event as a teenager. A man made of fog, big enough to resemble a man in shape but transparent enough to not have any standout features other than fog inside a shape, ran across my sister's car while we were driving in the mountains at night near Ojai. I'd say it was bullshit, but I didn't say a word when I saw it, and my brother right after looked at me with a "did you see that look?" But never said a word either. Then a few moments later, my sister spoke up as she pulled over to the side of the road, asking if we saw the cloud man run across the road. The 3 of us all saw it. Whatever it was not a person or an animal. This was in Guatemala, not far from Samayac, a town known for sorcery and witchcraft. We had been warned to avoid that town because of it. I've met many people in Guatemala who claim to have had experiences with spirits. One described in detail how he had been cursed for not giving up the soul of his firstborn son. Anyway, there were 8 of us in a house that night, and we had been discussing creepy experiences that caused 2 in the group to move out of a haunted house by Lake out at lawn. 2 of us were stuck sleeping on the tile floor as there weren't enough beds. After midnight, we had the lights out, and it was silent. A distinctive ping broke the silence like a fork hitting a crystal wine glass as a Guatemalan quarter hit the tile close to my ear. The moment it landed, that weird feeling of presence began. The other guy next to me immediately latched onto my side out of fear, which was oddly comforting. That was when the feeling of this thing in the room was strongest. It wasn't a physical feeling, but I don't know how else to describe it. Moving like a breeze, it went right through me and from one corner of the room to the next as if it were trapped and wanted to escape. As it went under the bed, it rustled an empty plastic grocery bag and then exited outside through the closed door. We all jumped up, as if by instinct, and followed it outside to make sure it was gone. We all came to the same conclusion about what we had just experienced. None of us were under the influence of any drug or alcohol. There wasn't a prankster in the group. Could there be other explanations? Sure, but the feeling that we all felt was one of a kind and changed as soon as whatever was there left. Many moons ago, we did this as teenagers. My boyfriend at the time, now ex-husband, was walking around the edge of a cement planter when he mistook a hedge for solid footing. He screamed in terror as he cartwheeled down and whacked his head pretty hard on a gravestone. We instantly all felt like bad children who'd been caught ducking up. Very weird feeling. Like the silence was scolding us. That's the best way I can describe it. We left in a hurry and got caught literally as we were exiting. The security guard was super nice but told us firmly not to come back after hours again. Later in life, I volunteered there, cleaning gravestones. My paternal grandma is buried there. Weird fact, the entire outer ring, encompassing acres and acres of property, was all babies and children. So, the stairs to my attic had smelled like burnt hair for 3 days, which was extremely odd because it was just that area and I have a very old, drafty house. On day 4, I came home from work just before midnight, and as soon as I walked through the door, I felt like I had someone standing over my shoulder, breathing down my neck. The feeling was so strong that I opened my medicine cabinet so the mirror was against the wall. I also showered with the shower curtain open because I had a powerful need to see the room. After a shower, I was a little less on edge until I walked past my 4-year-old daughter's room. The door was closed, but I heard her talking in her sleep. Then I heard a loud crash. I slowly opened the door to find her sleeping on top of the covers and the pile of stuffed animals she insisted on sleeping with scattered across the room. I turned the light on low, looked around the room, and checked her breathing. All seemed well, so I went to bed. The next morning, I asked her if she had had a bad dream. Yeah, there was a man with no arms and sauce on his face, and he kept laughing at me. I told him to go away, but he wouldn't. Then, an arm came out of the wall, threw me into the ceiling, and I crashed back down on my bed and went back to sleep. Me, sauce on his face? Yeah, red like spaghetti. So this happened, I think, 15 or so years ago when my grandpa passed away. In my culture, the dead are cremated, and elaborate ceremonies are performed. I was never very close to my grandfather. I barely remember ever having much to talk about with him, but my parents say I used to talk to him a lot as a child. Anyway, when he died, I didn't really know much about him other than that he was the patriarch of the family and everybody respected him. I was barely 10 years old then and was supposed to stay at an aunt's house. Sneaky as I was, I managed to follow my mother when she left for my grandfather's house, unaware that I was a few steps behind her. Anyway, the ceremony starts. There's a lot of crying, and soon 4 people, including my father, my uncles, and someone I cannot now remember, carry the body on top of a structure made of bamboo and wood. They chanted throughout the way. Nobody noticed that I was following them. They reached the cemetery. There's a lot of crying, and I got bored standing at a distance. It's almost dusk, and I sit, weirdly, on a nearby platform. I would later come to know that it was sort of a memorial for the deceased. Sometime between all this happening and fall asleep hours go by, and when I wake up, there is no one, just the last flames burning through pieces of wood. I panic. I look around to see if there's anyone, but there's no one. I start running towards the pyre, hoping perhaps some of my relatives might spot me by the fire and get hold of me. Again, no one. I started crying. I look around to see if I can find my way to the street. The cemetery was on the outskirts of the town, and it was huge to my tiny mind. Rows after rows of those memorials I mentioned earlier. It's almost dark, and I can hear animals howling at a distance. While all this is happening, I have a creepy feeling that I am being watched. It sends a shiver down my spine, and to this day, I don't remember ever being so shit scared. It was such a dark and nauseating feeling, a sense of impending doom. I cry louder and start running. Little did I know that I was running deeper into the cemetery, farther from the road that would take me home. I reach the edge of the open ground and catch my breath near the tree line. I can hear faint voices coming from beyond the silhouette of the trees in front of me. Perhaps someone will be returning after gathering wood from there. I am again hit with this nauseating feeling, and it's stronger now. To top it all off, every time I walked or ran, it felt like I could hear footsteps. Like someone right behind me. I turned around several times yet found no one. I was so afraid at that point that I thought I might die. I took a leap of faith and ran towards the trees. The sound of footsteps behind me grew louder, and it seemed like whoever it was almost at arm's length. Like they could just reach out and catch hold of me. I am audibly sobbing and shouting for help. There's barely any light, but I remember hearing people in the distance. Suddenly, I'm in a clearing and see there's a community pond with a bathing area. I could see some people in my family, and I ran toward them. No matter how loud I tried to cry, there was no sound coming out of my mouth. Finally, an ant saw me and ran towards me. The last thing I remember before fainting was a hand on my shoulder and my body almost freezing on the spot. I was sick for a week after that. I had nightmares for years and, in general, stopped going to my grandfather's house or even the town. To this day, I find it difficult to sleep in the dark and sometimes wake up with a cold sweat and a creepy feeling on my shoulder like someone is holding on to me. It was about 4 years ago. It wasn't the first paranormal occurrence to happen, it was just the one that scared me the most. One night, my 2.5-year-old son woke my husband and me up when he crawled into our bed. I couldn't fall back asleep, so I decided to work on a project in my craft room. I was in there for about 45 minutes when the small monitor on the nanny cam started rapidly flickering on and off. Mind you, these were not motion-censored cams, only continuous feed. The cams are in the living room and our son's room. I went over to the monitor and picked it up. All of a sudden, it made this loud, ear-piercing sound like mic feedback. It startled me, and I dropped the monitor face down. I noticed the glow around the edges had stopped flickering. I picked up the monitor and turned to look at the screen. I saw my son standing as still as a statue in the middle of the living room, staring at the wall. I started for the door with the monitor still in my hand. When I glanced down again, my son's head turned, only the head, and his eyes went directly to the camera in the upper corner of the room. He had no expression on his face at all. I left the room and went through the small kitchen and dining room, rounding the corner to the living room, and it was empty. The door to our bedroom was on the other side. I went in there, and my son was sound asleep in the same position he was in when I left. My husband looked up from his e-reader. I asked him if he had woken up and gone to the living room. He told me no. I asked if my husband had gotten up to go to the bathroom or kitchen. I thought maybe he just didn't see our son try to follow him. But my husband swears he hasn't left the bed at all, and our son has been peacefully snoring away the whole time. Like I said before, this wasn't the first time we had seen doppelgangers, but it was always so brief that you didn't really have time to get scared or have it completely register yet. This was different, it wasn't just a glimpse. Above all, it was the look on my son's face, that empty, void stare, when he turned his head to face the camera. Still, even now, it gives me the chills. A clairvoyant told me the child was dreaming or astrally projecting. I experienced it with my daughter when she was a toddler. I was in my son's room settling him when I heard her crying, so I dashed out into the hallway to see her run into the living room. I went to intercept her at the other side, but she was not there. I freaked out and started looking for her, and she was asleep in bed. It happened again when I was standing in the doorway to the bedroom talking on the phone. I was holding a washing basket on my hip, and she ran under it. I shrieked because I thought she would hit her head. I spun around but couldn't see her. She was in the playroom. We also had an incident very recently in a different house. We have been here for 3 uneventful years. My son won an award at school, so I got him a joke rubber chicken as a present. He has ADHD, so he got really carried away with it, and it was confiscated. One evening after showers, my son shouted yay and started playing with the chicken. My husband got annoyed and took the chicken and told him off. My son cried. He told us that my husband had stood by the bookshelf, handed the chicken to him, and walked off without saying a word. My husband was in the kitchen the whole time, and my son was adamant my husband lifted the chicken off the top shelf and gave it to him. My wife and I used to argue that there was something in this house. One night after we went to bed, I rolled over to see her sitting up. "What's the matter, hun?" I asked, thinking it was a bathroom run or something. She pointed into the living room and said, "Someone's walking around in there." I turned and looked, and there was a silhouette of a man in front of the TV. He positioned himself perfectly to be seen down the hallway. He stood there for what felt like 2 minutes staring at us, then faded out. Normally, when you see a shadow, it's gone in a blink. He did not do that. It felt purposeful. Like we were supposed to see him. Very uncomfortable feeling. My first house was built in 1913. After moving in, I knew pretty much right away that I wasn't alone because, out of the corner of my eye, I would always see movement in the mirror of the built-in china cabinet. I also smoked back then and came out of the bedroom one morning to find the ashtray flipped off the end table onto the floor. Lots of little things kept happening over the years, but I never felt threatened or scared. We, meaning the ghosts and spirits and me, coexisted in the house with no problems. My boyfriend moved in, and after a few years, we got married. I'd talk about these things, and he'd just look at me, never saying too much about any of it. He traveled quite a bit for work, so I was home alone a lot. One night, I was on my computer, listening to music and playing games. Plain as day, I was tapped from behind on the right shoulder 3 times. I screamed and jumped up. I turned around, and nothing or no one was there. Scared the crap out of me. I told my, now, husband about it, and then he started opening up about the shadows he'd see moving around in my office. He talked about the footsteps he'd hear in the house when he was alone. The tapping on my shoulder happened another time after that. When we were moving out of the house and it was pretty much empty, I was there alone cleaning, and I heard the footsteps he talked about. Whatever or whoever was there started to feel more menacing towards the end of our time there. I loved the house, but I was pretty glad when we left. When I was about 14 or 15 years old, I went for a sleepover at a friend's house. We stayed up late, watching scary movies, etc. Typical sleepover shit. Anyways, we went to sleep in the same bed, and at some point in the night I could feel tugging on the blanket, so I opened my eyes and saw a hand coming over me and grabbing the blanket and pulling it off of me. At first, I just thought my friend was grabbing the blanket in her sleep, but I could still feel her back to mine, so there was no way her arm would be like that while back to back. I started to prop myself up, and I saw a man standing at the foot of the bed. I fully panicked and jumped out of bed to run my ass off to the light switch. I switched it on, and the man was gone, but her bedroom door, which was previously locked and closed, was open. With the knob still locked. I closed the door and tried to get my friend to wake up, but she was a super heavy sleeper. I have no idea how I managed to fall back asleep, but I did. I never stayed at her house again. When I was 14, I was mowing my grandfather's lawn. He happened to be living elsewhere at the time, so it was my job to clean up a few things, grab any erroneous mail, and mow the lawn. I was about 2/3 done, and I felt like someone was watching me. Knowing I was there alone gave me the creeps. I was finishing up the back lawn. I turned around, and leaning against the fence post was an older man, about 50, wearing a fancy black suit and a top hat. He looked directly into my face, tipped his hat at me, and disappeared. My wife, infant daughter, and I moved into a house in 2019. The previous family was only there for a year. We thought nothing of it because the housing market was hot and they made money off the sale. My wife and I are atheists, but we got really spooked by some weird noises and bangs coming from our daughter's room. We saw things flying around on my Nanit baby camera. We thought they were bugs or dust, but my friend is convinced they're orbs. We only saw them when my daughter would cry in her crib. My wife went into my daughter's room and told whatever it was to leave us alone, and we didn't hear much after that. A year later, we heard other odd things. I bought an EMF detector and a spirit box to rule out any possibilities of the paranormal. The EMF would go off randomly, and I started having conversations with an entity on the spirit box. I brought my friend over who loves ghost hunting shows because I wanted to show him I wasn't full of shit. He came super prepared with questions to ask, and unfortunately, the entity told us to run multiple times and told us it's a demon. I still talk to it because I want more evidence. I record everything, and it greets me and asks how I'm doing before I get the first word in once the spirit box is turned on. My friend told me to sage the house, and I'm pretty sure it had no effect except for pissing off my wife because it stunk up the house. But yeah, I totally believe in the paranormal and an afterlife now. I'm still collecting evidence and having fun with it, but I'm being very cautious at the same time. I once lived in a house in Mississippi that had its fair share of what I would now call poltergeist activity. The stove, TVs, no remotes back then, and record player all started by themselves. Lamps are coming on. Footsteps on the hardwood floors, doors slamming. We would be awakened at night by what sounded like someone banging on the outside of the house. My dad would go look, but no one was ever there. We stayed there for about 5 years. It got to the point where I would not stay inside the house whenever I was alone. When we moved out, it was never occupied for very long. It finally burned to the ground when no one was living there. I worked at a school for young adults who were disabled and couldn't go into mainstream education as a cleaner for a couple months last year. The school was on a mountain, and they did a lot of outdoor activities. There was a carpentry workshop I was tasked with cleaning. It was the only place where there were no cameras, and it was up a long and winding mountain road, about a mile out from the main school, past an old abandoned house that soldiers used as a hideout during World War II. From the first day I started, it gave me the creeps. I was entirely alone, surrounded by trees, and I worked there just as it was getting dark. It was usually just me, a dead mouse or two, and the trees. I always dreaded working in that part and tried to avoid it as much as humanly possible, as to not piss off my boss. It unsettled me so deeply that I ended up asking my mother to stay with me while I worked once when she left me off. To preface the next part, the building was a mile away from anywhere with other people. It was only accessible by walking up the dirt road as car access was blocked off. We had no computers or TVs in the building either. There were no radios, just my mobile phone. One day, I was there, entirely alone. I had been there for about an hour. The place was silent. I was cleaning tables left upstairs in the building. Then, out of nowhere, I heard this deep choral singing. It sounded like priests or monks singing. No words were distinguishable at all, just melody. It continued for about 2 minutes, and I was so terrified I didn't even think to take my phone from my pocket and record it. I absolutely lost my SHT and walked out of the building. Even today, just thinking about it gives me the creeps. I witnessed a spontaneous exorcism while at a prayer meeting in high school. So it was like 10 years ago, but I remember it like it was last week. No one knew or could tell that this guy had an attachment to something he picked up while on a mission trip, more like a church field trip, the week prior. The only way we knew anything was up was that his demeanor completely changed, his voice was something not human, and he began acting weird. This guy literally sprinted outside, and his scream sounded like something was being ripped off of him. The older men in the group who chased after him, this was at a friend's house whose parents were involved, reported his body temperature rose when they touched him to prey on him, and then the screams got even louder and sounded like at least 3 other screams in one. Meanwhile, the others, including me, who were inside somehow acquired the ability to speak in tongues. When that happened, his screams changed to the 3-in-1 sound. It was really bizarre. Anyway, this whole ordeal lasted at least an hour. Once the scream stopped, the guy fell asleep and woke up without any memory of the event, and there was this heavy but liberating peace that filled the area. He then told us he was experimenting with some voodoo and hoodoo things while on the trip to No La. He figures something is attached to him then, but who really knows? That was my first and last prayer meeting. But I can say without a shadow of a doubt that the spiritual realm is real. Spiritual warfare is a thing. This wasn't as scary as it was uncomfortable. When I was in college, I moved into a house with some people I didn't know very well. Almost as soon as I moved in, I regularly got the creeps. But I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want these people to think that I was odd. One day, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when one of my housemates came in and asked if he could talk with me. He then asked me if, when I'm home alone, I feel like I'm not all alone. It turned out that we'd both been getting the creeps. Both of us had experienced seeing things before, so we weren't too freaked out. He said that he knew someone who did seances, and he would ask her to come over and perform one. They did schedule a date and time for the event. One night, I was home alone, painting in a basement room that had turned into a studio, when I felt someone hugging me. It felt like a hug from a child. Every hair on my body stood on end. I went upstairs, grabbed my jacket and boots, and left the house. As soon as I crossed the threshold, the feeling went away. I put on my boots and jacket and left to find my housemates on campus. When I found my housemates, I told them what had happened and that I wanted to have the seance that night because, although I'm cool with sharing my space with ghosts, I'm not cool with being touched by them. My housemate found the woman, and we all returned home along with a group of people who wanted to observe. We cleared the dining room, and some of us sat around the table with our hands on the thing that moves around the Ouija board. The woman started to ask if there was anyone in the house who wanted to communicate. And the thing started to move. Now, although I've had a few ghost experiences, I'm still skeptical, so I thought that someone was moving the thing around and I was watching out for deception. The woman asked again if anyone was there, and the answer moved to yes. She asked its name, and it was spelled Ned. When she asked how old it was, it pointed to 6. When she asked why it was there, it was spelled Want Mama. When she asked where its mother was, it spelled, Mama go bye bye. That's when chills went through my spine, and a few of the women started sobbing. The woman performing the seance told Ned to go to the light because his mother was waiting for him there. We wondered if perhaps Ned had died in the house but didn't understand what had happened to him. I lived in that house for 2 more years and never had another experience. This occurred before the internet. If it had happened within the past decade or so, I would have searched census records to try to identify Ned. In the woods, on my way to the bathroom at 2 a.m. in a supposedly haunted forest. The park was empty because it was midweek, kind of an off-season. I was halfway through the shortcut that goes through a heavily wooded area when I heard giggling. Looking around with my flashlight, there was no one around. Then I heard it again, a little closer. At that stage, I figured it must have been a raccoon in the trees, but I was a little freaked out. I was almost out when I heard a female voice whisper hello like it was right beside my ear. I bolted pretty quickly after that and was so scared I didn't notice a log and cut my leg up or ripped my pants pretty badly. I wish that was the end of it, but after using the bathroom and cleaning up a bit, I just couldn't bring myself to go back through the shortcut. The thought of going through it brought on this heavy feeling of dread. So I walked close, but ultimately passed it to go the long way. As I turned away from the shortcut entrance, again, my flashlight was all over that place looking for someone or something to explain what I had heard. At the entrance of the woods I heard a sharp comeback. I ran, and I don't go on bathroom breaks by myself at night in the woods anymore. I used to be super into visiting haunted houses, hotels, etc., ghost investigations, etc. The Shanley Hotel in New York was the most active, clearly genuinely haunted place that I've seen, but the scariest experience I ever had was at my family's old house. It was a big house, and as the oldest of 3 siblings, I had the privilege of living in the in-law portion, like a tiny apartment built into the main house. Privilege is in quotation marks because there was always something weird about that part of the house. Lights flickering, weird things showing up in photographs or selfies. I took a picture for my LDR girlfriend at the time, and it looked like there was a hand around my throat. Other things that I thought could have somehow been explained rationally, I brushed off. One night, while sleeping on Skype with said girlfriend, I woke up to the horrifying, deafening sounds and vibrations of something running towards me at full force and speed. I've never been as scared as I was in that moment, and I've never screamed louder. Didn't even sound like my voice screaming. I scared the shite out of my girlfriend, but she scared me more when she said she had woken up just before me and she had heard it too. It's been 7-ish years, and I still get freaked out thinking back to that night. My house was built in the 1860s, and there is a substantially large amount of paranormal activity, such as people standing in doorways until you look right at them, things going missing, and things turning up in completely different areas of the house, such as the TV remote found in the kitchen after being lost for 2 months. Along with the outline of people moving across rooms when you're watching TV or even going across the room you're in. Now onto the stories. I was playing video games, 3 months after number 1, 2 months before my friend and I went out separate ways, and I'm about to go to bed, TS 1:30, so I'm about to shut the console down, and for some reason, I look over at the storage room we have in our house, and the door's open because every once in a while doors open and close in my house, so I think no big deal, it just opened again, but then I look a little closer and there is someone looking at me, and when it sees me looking at it runs off into the corner of the room. I was riding in a car through a rural farm area late at night. The road is long and straight, and houses are really spread out. Maybe every quarter mile or so, we'd pass a mailbox or the entrance to a long driveway. There are no streetlights, so beyond the car headlights, we could only see what the moon dimly illuminated. We'd been driving for a long time, passing a whole lot of nothing, when suddenly the headlights illuminated a young girl in a white dress hugging a stuffed animal standing on the side of the road. My friend and I shot each other a WTF look, like, what the duck is this kid doing out here in the middle of the night? He stopped the car, and we whipped the car around to see if she needed help. The girl was gone. We maneuvered the car to shine the lights around. Nothing. There was seriously nowhere that this girl could have run away to without us seeing her run. The only thing that surrounded us were freshly plowed fields of dirt. My friend got out of the car and yelled something like, "Are you okay?" But there was no response. He started walking out into the field. There was no little girl to be found. We drove up the driveway and knocked on the door. Someone finally came to the door, and we asked if they had a young girl who may have run away or snuck out. Nope. No kids. Neighbors didn't have a daughter either. If I had been alone, I would have convinced myself that my mind was playing tricks on me. But my friend and I both saw the girl. I still can't explain it besides thinking it was a ghost. I've racked my brain trying to think about how the little girl could have hidden in the 15-ish seconds it took us to turn the car around. But there was nowhere to hide, and if she were running, she would have stuck out like a beacon, bobbing across the barren fields. I had always seen things. My mother used to tell me I imagined it, so I always wrote it off as such. In the early 1990s, I left the army and lived with a friend. He was a good guy who always loved a good joke. She was tall and thin with long hair, that's important. We moved into a one-bedroom apartment directly behind Houston's Hollywood Cemetery. He slept in the bedroom, and I took the couch because I always got up before him for work. After a month or so of living there, I wake up to him standing over me in the dark. I assume he is trying to scare me and tell him it's late and he should go F off. The next morning, I read him the riot act. Don't bother me when I'm sleeping. Jokes are fine, but not when I'm trying to sleep. He insists he didn't do anything, and I'm just delusional. It happens again a few nights later. He's just standing there in the dark, looking at me. I flip him off, turn over, and go back to sleep. The next morning, I confronted him again and told him I was going to give him a sound thrashing if it happened again. He swears it's not him and that I'm having nightmares or something. A day or two later, I wake up again to find him standing there. Now I'm pissed. I sit up and yell, "Punk witch, didn't I tell you to stop f***ing with me?" From the bedroom, I hear his voice. "Sesh? What are you yelling about? Are you okay?" Without missing a beat, I yell back, "Yay, but you're in here." As I trail off, Kenny comes through the bedroom door. We are both looking at the silhouette of a woman standing between us. We screamed like little schoolgirls. The spirit, or whatever she was, just evaporated away as we watched and screamed. We both sat up, drinking coffee, and talked about what happened. I skipped work, and we talked until we fell asleep. That was the first time I knew I was not crazy or dreaming things up. The first time I ever saw something supernatural. When I was 7 or 8, I woke up in the middle of the night and saw something standing in the corner, where my closet was. He looked human, but his eyes were deep pits of black void, his fingers were more like claws, and his hair was white. Plus, where he was standing, there was just an avalanche of toys. No one should have been able to stand there. Instead of screaming and feeling scared, I just looked at him for a few moments, trying to figure out who he was. That's when he reached out towards me, and I felt lulled back to sleep. The next morning was Easter Sunday. Like always, Mom and I went to church, and it was just a normal day. I completely forgot about what I saw during the night, and all was fine. Until the guy who bust in a group of homeless people showed up with his usual crowd. However, there was a new face, a familiar face. When we made eye contact, I finally remembered everything. Because that thing from my room was standing right in front of me, smirking. I ran to tell my mom, and when she saw him, she took a couple steps back, and we immediately went home. We also never went back to that church. I thought I got away, but he's now my sleep paralysis monster. It's great. Even now, I'm not sure what it is, but ever since, I've been sensitive to stuff like that. I can tell when there's some sort of presence in a building or nearby area. I've had no choice but to accept this type of stuff as real. I would say the thing that made me believe was that in my grandma's older house, there was a family that lived there before. It was an old house, but a 1980s home. Well, after she moved in the driveway were handprints from the family's imprinting when they first moved in. 2 kids, a mom's, and a dad's handprints with the date etched, and they had to leave the house because the dad passed away and they could no longer afford to stay there. I asked her about this, and that was my grandma's explanation. I always felt uneasy in this house anyway. Couldn't figure out why. But I did. I hated to go around the house at night. It was 2 stories high and quite big. Every time I went up the stairs, I felt like something was following me. One night, I went to the kitchen to get something to drink. I set the empty plastic cup on the counter and went to get something. Couldn't remember, and the cup flew off the counter. Like someone smacked it. I went around the kitchen to make sure no draft was coming in. Nope. The cup wasn't even on the edge of the counter. I was like, okay? So I picked it up and put it back. I kind of knew there was something weird going on. But I didn't want to believe the house was haunted. I would just freak myself out even more. The next day, I woke up in the early afternoon to go downstairs again. The stairs lead into the living room, but you have to turn a corner to get there, and there's another door that leads to the kitchen. So I decided to take this route for the hell of it. I stopped dead in my tracks, and there's some figure in the corner of the living room near the door I need to get through. I rubbed my eyes a few times to make sure I wasn't dreaming or that there wasn't anything in my eyes. Nope, it was still there. It was like a black, misty figure. It looked like a grown adult was just chilling there, just watching me. Or maybe it was just chilling. I have no idea. I just stood there staring because I was terrified but also wanted to know what was going on. Eventually it went away, and I went the other way to get to the kitchen and went out into the backyard just to leave the house. I then told my grandma and mom what happened, and they brushed it off. That following night I was watching TV in my room when I heard a hello, and my heart started racing so fast, and that same thing was in my goddamn room. It looked more put together. He was in some blue jeans and a white tank, I believe. He was like, "My name is Greg," and I was just staring. I asked Greg to leave me alone, and I was never bothered again. I wasn't rude, just scared. Shit sounds crazy, but I guess he wanted attention or someone to talk to? It scared me too much to find out. Again, I never saw Greg again after that night. So I live in a 2-bedroom townhouse. I'm not sure how long this place has been here, but I'm not sure if it's old enough for paranormal stuff or if anything sinister has happened here. But I'd say it's at least 20 years old. We've been here a little over 4 years. We've had some incidents where our stairs give off a vibe, and my husband, who has said he has seen things, said there is an entity on our stairs. I'd say a couple years ago I saw something reflect on our TV in the living room facing the stairs, but I can't be sure what it was. Nothing has ever really happened. We have cats. They lay on the stairs and don't seem spooked. We also had children while living here. And I've had dreams before where a dark entity tried to attack my children, and I pushed it back. Like used some weird force shit. My daughter says weird SHT sometimes. The window is scary, and they don't like the lights off, but I've chalked it up to kids being kids who are scared of the dark. Last night, though, was weird as duck. I've always used a light to get from our bedroom to the bathroom or just turn the hallway on. The bathroom is right next to the stairs. I've always turned the light on the stairs, because, TBH, it does freak me out a little for some reason. Like something's watching me pee. Lol. But I also do it for the cats because they have to go downstairs to eat and stuff. This time, though, I walked to my bathroom and turned the light on like always. Except, it didn't turn on. Now I know what you're thinking, well, it could be a fault in the switch or the light bulb burned out. Except there were 3 light bulbs, and they all didn't turn on. I wasn't exactly afraid, but I thought it was weird. So I just peed and went to bed. Nothing happened. The next morning, the lights turned on. There was no blackout either because the hall light was turned on. Well, I told my husband, and he looked at me all serious. He said, "Next time that happens, go back to bed or to the other bathroom downstairs. And don't look out the window. There's a window in the upstairs bathroom because they didn't put a vent in this bathroom." Lol. He didn't explain exactly what the entity was. So I came on here to see if there is some lore of an entity that shuts off lights or something and takes people. I live in SC, BTW. I don't know if that helps with lore. I'd also like to add that I think something does follow me or watch me sometimes. I get weird feelings at night. One time, I used one of those heat or ghost find apps that showed me a trail or something. The whole screen filled up, which meant it was right in front of me. I get that feeling now. But I'm not a super paranoid person. I'd be more likely to tell them to stop SHT before hiding under the covers and being scared. My husband and his mom, she's a witch, but I'm not sure what kind, say they're seeing things. Now, in her house, I've smelled strange things, which my husband says are native. My nose and instincts pick up things, but not my sight. There are no smells in my own home. Just flickers of things. I guess my question is, what the heck am I dealing with? I don't think it's hostile. Just curious. Though my husband says don't interact. Also, I'm still going to pee in my own bathroom. There's no way I'm going downstairs. Years ago, I'd say maybe 1995-ish, some friends and myself went to see Ed and Lorraine Warren in CT for one of their October shows with videos, pictures, and Q&A. It was always a fun night, and I'd seen them numerous times. They had video of the white lady at Union Cemetery that Ed had captured. It looked pretty crazy. So the day before Halloween, about 10 of us went to Union, loaded our film once we got there, and were ready to explore. I didn't see anything too out of the ordinary, but I did hear a ton of strange noises around the cemetery and church, which was a little scary to be honest. We took a ton of pictures of the gravestones in church. A few of us held hands to make a circle on the church steps in front and called for spirits if there were any. About a month later, one of my friends finally got the pictures back, and we were all pretty stunned by what we caught. The picture of us holding hands at the church had a huge yellow orb in the middle of us, tons of orbs at the cemetery/gravestones, and the freakiest of all was that someone took a picture of the church. There was no one inside when we were there, and in the picture was a side view of a window with an old man inside, wearing a hat, like legit in the picture. It was very strange. Unfortunately, I'm not really in contact with any of the people I went with, but I'd sure love to see those pictures again. I grew up in a seriously haunted house, so it takes a lot for something paranormal to really scare me. I've seen and heard things. You name it. I lived in an apartment complex about 11 years ago, and other than some terrifyingly large wolf spiders, I never heard or saw anything paranormal. Then the old dude who lived across from me had a party one weekend, and his brother died. Alcohol poisoning. His body lay there for over 12 hours because everyone thought he was sleeping it off. After he passed, I would occasionally hear some odd sounds, but nothing major. Then one night I was laying in bed with my toddler, waiting for her to go to sleep, and something blocked the light that had been shining into the room from the bathroom. I whipped my head up off the pillow and looked towards the door, and there was a black mass that was loosely in the shape of a person in the doorway. My whole body started tingling, and I squeezed my eyes shut for a moment because I was terrified and unsure if it was a real person who had broken in or something paranormal. I popped my eyes back open, and it was gone, so I hopped up out of bed, grabbed my shotgun and a couple shells, and took off after it. The only door into the apartment still had both locks locked, and the chain was still in place. Windows were closed and locked. I checked under every bed and inside all the closets and didn't find anything. I heard noises again after that, but never saw anything again. I moved a couple of months later, when my lease was up. My siblings and I used to play hide and seek in the dark pretty often. It was especially fun on a new moon night. The room would get so dark you couldn't see a hand in front of your face. I remember some specific events that happened on a full moon, though. There are 4 of us, 3 scatter in the bedroom in various spots, and 1 is the seeker. You stand as still as you can, and the seeker would try to use stuff like echolocation or whatever to hunt you down. Snap in the air and listen to how it sounds different. You were allowed to move from your spot if you could really be light on your toes, and that was fun to perk your ears up too. Anyway, for the first event, I remember thinking it was so funny that we all hid in the same spot under the bed. Shoulders touching, I'm in the middle of what I thought were my sisters. My brother stumbles around the room, getting farther away. We're trying not to giggle, but then I hear him push aside the closet door and my youngest sister squeal. I remember whipping my head over to meet my sister's face, just barely making out a confused look in the moonlight, and looking over to see where I thought was my youngest sister on my side. I just saw this faint outline of a figure, but the full moon was bright enough that it wasn't pitch black, so I could faintly see and feel that someone was there. I made a soft oh noise, and my brother came bounding over with a ha gotcha. And flashed his light on us. Just my sister and me, though. The figure was gone. We were both so bewildered, and we were so confident that all 3 of us were under there. Another instance is the same game, but this time it happens to my brother, who is hiding with his retelling. I'm the seeker, and I remember finding him, and the white wash over his face was something else. I'm standing in the other corner of the room, snapping closer to my sister, and he takes advantage of this and does a tiptoe past me to get to a different spot. He gets into the crack of the closet and has to shove his way in a little bit past who he thought was the youngest sister. He says he was holding his breath and was annoyed that she wasn't and that she was going to give them away. He's about to shush her softly when he hears the squeals of me finding the other 2. He says he was just frozen in place, listening to the breathing. I turn on my flashlight to announce he's the winner, no answer, and I open the closet door to see him buried in the corner with saucers for eyes. We always got the sense that a kid was playing with us, but when you're young and dealing with that kind of stuff, it really freaks you out in the moment. We both remember vividly touching someone that wasn't actually there, with just enough moonlight in the room for a faint outline of a figure to know that it wasn't just clothes or stuffies. One that really freaked me out was practicing the clap or snap thing with sound. Siblings scatter, I'm the seeker. Couple steps and a snap in the air, couple more and a snap snap. Continue on until it starts to sound off and you know you're getting close to something. I don't know the science behind it, but most of the time it worked pretty well. Snap snap, high pitch, snap snap, lower pitch, a step closer, snap snap, lower pitch, snap snap, no echo, and breath in my face. Squint to see the faintest outline of hair. I remember going ha. And as I'm reaching through nothing where I thought would be a sibling, I hear a whiny groan and a sharp shh from in another corner. I turn the flashlight on, and nobody is in front of me. My youngest sister and brother were behind me under the bed, squirmishing over space with my other sister on the actual bed above them. There were loads of other instances in that house growing up, but the ones where my siblings also experienced them are some of my favorites. I once had a neighbor called Nigel in my former town, a block of flats. Nigel had a heroin problem. I don't do heroin myself and didn't over-socialize with him. His partner, Kelly, was bipolar and physically abusive towards him. He'd hang with me for refuge, usually after she'd assaulted him. His birthday was Halloween. On Christmas Day 2010, I heard them arguing throughout the day. On Boxing Day, Kelly knocked on my door and told me Nigel was dead. Apparently drank too much methadone. At the time, when asked, she didn't know how he died but would say methadone 3 months later. Strange as drugs are done as a cause of death much earlier, and so she'd have told me this much earlier. I accidentally let slip to Kelly on Boxing Day that I'd heard them arguing on Christmas Day. She offered me his Christmas dinner, which I accepted but did not eat. So, one night in the early hours of the morning, I'm asleep on the sofa in the living room in darkness, but the curtains were not drawn closed, so street light was coming in through the window. I'm asleep, and I'm awoken by the creaking of the living room door behind me. The door was creaking back and forth in a rhythmic motion as if, well, there was no wind. At first, it stirred me awake, but as I opened my eyes and looked at the door, the way it was moving started to creep me out. I turned my head and closed my eyes as I was still very tired, then I heard a loud thud. I sprung up and saw a fresh handprint on the inside of my window. The thud was the window, but where did the handprint come from? And what was causing the door to rock back and forth like that? The door creeped me out a little, but hearing that thud and seeing a handprint that wasn't there beforehand. I just sat up, staring at the handprint. I was spooked. I'm pretty sure I'd gone very pale. I started to feel like I'd just been visited by a ghost. Kelly, by this point, had moved out some time ago as she lost her legs to heroin usage and needed ground floor accommodation. To this day, I think it was Nigel. I was staying at my buddy's place out in the country for the summer. I was just laying around reading while everybody was gone for the day, enjoying all the strong sunlight pouring through the huge windows, when I started hearing music. I put down my book and stood up, pretty freaked out but convinced there was some logical explanation. A radio left on in the basement, someone playing a flute in the next house over across the pastures way off in the distance, a practical joke, or possibly a creep outside the house trying to lure me out, I have no clue which, but it was definitely real music. And as I was standing there, torn between curiosity about the ethereal music and panic at failing to determine the source, I noticed strange movement in the dust motes dancing in the sunbeams. It was pulling together, thickening, darkening, and definitely trying to form a distinct little girl sort of shape. Just this impossible, horrible darkness right in the middle of that bright sunlight, clearly trying so hard to look like a little girl standing in the room with me. Obviously, I went screaming to the opposite end of the house, locked myself in the safest feeling room I could find, and hid under a blanket until my buddy came home. Only time I've run away from sunlight to hide in a basement. Whatever that thing was, it was not a little girl. I 100% believe a home I once lived in is haunted. In 2020, I got married to my now husband. We moved into his childhood home. I had been dating him for years prior to our marriage, so I had visited the house many times. During these times, I never noticed anything strange about the house. All of the weird, ghostly things started happening when I moved in. This is an older home. We are told that it was used as an army barracks in the 1940s. We are also located in South Georgia, near Savannah, which is a very old city with a rich history. I would frequently get the unsettling feeling that someone was watching me. I shrugged this off, as I'm someone who gets scared and worked up easily. However, over the months I lived there, the feelings intensified. I felt like I wasn't alone. Then one night, I was in the bathroom when I heard pounding steps in the living room. And our bedroom door opening and closing. I was very close to calling my husband's name, but a little voice inside me urged me to be quiet. When I came out of the bathroom, I booked it to our bedroom, where my husband was sound asleep. I immediately woke my husband up, asking if it was him I heard. He said no, that it wasn't him, and he, being the skeptical type, woke up and searched the house for an intruder. No such intruder could be found. I also had a friend come over who experienced things in the house. Keep in mind, I had not told her anything about the house at this point. She stayed in our guest bedroom. Later, she shared with me that she felt unsettled in this room and felt like she was being watched. Because of these feelings, she went into the living room to sleep on the couch. She has a dream that her fiancé came out of the bedroom, her fiancé was staying over as well, and laid down beside her. She could physically feel him touching her. During this experience, she was unable to move. When she woke up, her fiancé wasn't there. When she asked him the next morning if he had laid down beside her in the living room, he said no. Now, my brother and sister-in-law live there. I also hadn't told my brother and sister-in-law about my experiences there. One day, my sister-in-law comes to me and asks if anything strange happened to me in that house. We exchanged stories, with her telling me she had seen blue orbs and a gray mist. My brother-in-law, like his brother, my husband, is a skeptic. He didn't believe either of us until he had an experience himself. He was sitting in his bedroom with the door ajar. Across the house, near the guest bedroom, he saw a flash of movement. He saw a male African-American child in old-fashioned clothing, a white button-down shirt and dress pants, running from the living room to the guest bedroom. He described the apparition as being very blurry. I called my grandmother. She's very sensitive to the spirit realm. She's seen spirits, felt their presence, and even had premonitions. My grandmother came over and blessed the house. She said that she felt a presence and got the feeling that they had been there a long time. Following this, I still felt like something was watching me. Then my brother and sister-in-law moved in and had their experiences. I guess the blessing didn't work? A few friends and I decided we wanted to visit a local cemetery one night just for fun because this place had a reputation for being haunted. It is situated on top of a large hill in the middle of nowhere, miles from the nearest town, and at the end of about a quarter-mile long dead-end road leading to the cemetery, there is a radio tower. Some speculate that the radio waves are the source of the strange activity that people experience there. Anyway, just as soon as we get to the base of the radio tower and pull onto the lane going back to the cemetery, we're already creeped out because the trees on both sides of the road create a sort of tunnel through the woods leading to a small rock parking area with the iron gate at the entrance to the burial grounds. Right when we parked and I stepped out of the car, I immediately heard what sounded like a voice in the woods and brushed it off as imagining things, until my friend went, "Did you hear that?" This all happened within a split second, so I knew they heard what I said, and I asked them to describe it to double check, and she independently described what I heard. We decided to walk through the gate and into the cemetery to walk around in the dark and take some random photos, hoping to catch something on camera. That was the first time I'd ever seen orbs with my own eyes. Each one I saw had a different color with a tail that trailed behind it, kind of streaky the way a sparkler is when you move it really quickly, but these were slow moving and floaty like a butterfly. The entire time, we kept hearing what sounded like a woman in the woods, and as time went on, the sound got louder and longer, sounding like someone moaning in pain every few minutes. You could even make out what sounded like syllables in speech, but not enough to understand any words. Eventually we decided to investigate the noise, and in a tight group, we started walking towards the sound until we were about 20 yards from the edge of the woods. Then the noise rang out like a long, drawn-out scream that tapered off, the loudest and longest we had heard it up until that point. We all froze in terror until someone gathered their senses enough to say we needed to leave. We got the hell out of there, and I didn't sleep for 3 days after it all happened because I was so freaked out. I should note that I've spent a lot of time in the woods hunting, so I'm knowledgeable about local wildlife, and I have never heard anything like that from an animal before. There was also no sound of crunching leaves or any kind of movement from the source of this noise. I've even looked online at different animal sounds like foxes and mountain lions, and I have yet to hear anything that even comes close to what we heard that night.